You're listening to CherryPickin Entertainment.
Throw me the ball and watch what I do with it.
You are now tuned into the CherryPickin podcast with your host, Andre Cherry.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the CherryPickin podcast. I'm your host, Andre Cherry, and we are already in week 10 of the college football season. I can't believe the season is already at week 10. We've got November right around the corner, and we're in like our last month of regular season college football. Can you believe that? I feel like the season just started. It's crazy. On this episode, I want to talk about some of the games from week 9 action. And then, of course, as I typically do, I will end this podcast off with my Week 10 straight-up locks for Week 10 action. I'll give you my top 5 predictions for teams that will win straight up within the Power 5 or Power 4 conferences. So we'll go ahead and kick this episode off here. And I want to talk about Indiana. Indiana is 8-0. College game day was in Bloomington, Indiana this past weekend to highlight an unbeaten Indiana team that was the first team in college football to earn bowl eligibility this season. The Hoosiers hosted Washington this weekend and ended up beating the Huskies by a score of 31-17. Indiana is a really well-balanced team, as I've said in the past, and while its schedule is devoid of any real competition, at least to this point, it's still commendable that the Hoosiers have done its job week in and week out to get to 8-0 on the season. If the season ended today, Indiana would be in the Big Ten championship game, which is quite remarkable considering that they've only won 3 games a season ago under a different head coach. Indiana's head coach this season, Curt Cignetti, is new to Indiana, but he was a winner at James Madison and has never had a losing record. He's never had a losing season. He's currently 27-4 for his entire head coaching career, which is outstanding. Indiana has a winner in Coach Cignetti, and under his leadership, Indiana is 8-0 for the first time since 1967. This weekend, Indiana travels to Michigan State to play the Spartans, so good luck to Indiana to try to remain unbeaten. Another team that deserves some flowers is Colorado. Don't look now, but Colorado is officially bowl eligible after its 34-23 victory against Cincinnati this past weekend. The turnaround for Colorado is quite remarkable, especially considering that this team has had 6 straight losing seasons, and I'm not counting the COVID season, and they've only gone to 1 bowl game in the last 8 seasons, dating back to that COVID season of 2020. Coach Prime inherited a team that had only won 1 game the season prior to his arrival. I would have to imagine that Deion Sanders is in the running for Coach of the Year. He won't win it, but I would have to think that he's in consideration for the honor right now. During Colorado's matchup against Cincinnati, its quarterback Shedeur Sanders broke a school record by completing his first 15 passes of the game. He threw for 323 yards. He also scored 3 total touchdowns. Sanders, no doubt, is a beast, and he is one of the main pieces in this Colorado overhaul these last couple seasons. Sanders' favorite target, Travis Hunter, who is also a major piece of this rebuild. He's a dual threat attack. He plays both sides of the ball. He had a great game as well. He caught 9 passes for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. So shout out to the Buffaloes. Prior to this season starting, I thought that they would have a rough go at making a bowl game this season, but by God, they've done it. And I'm sure their goals do not stop at just earning bowl eligibility. I'm sure they're pleased that they're bowl eligible, but the Buffaloes are squarely in the hunt for the Big 12 championship and have a good shot to do it. Now we've got to talk a little bit about Navy and Texas A&M, so we'll tackle Navy first. Navy got humbled this weekend in the blowout 51-14 point loss to Notre Dame on Saturday at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. Navy lost 5 fumbles and had 6 turnovers overall that led directly to 28 points for Notre Dame. The Irish outgained Navy 466 to 310 yards, and the 51 points they put up were the most Navy had given up all season. Now, all is not lost for Navy despite this loss, and the fact that they only have 1 loss against a very good Notre Dame squad is nothing to be ashamed of. Notre Dame needed a game like this to ensure it's still in the hunt for a playoff spot at the end of the season. I am not taking anything away from Navy, but Notre Dame knew it had to make a statement this weekend, and the fact that Navy was unbeaten and also ranked coming into this matchup made this victory even sweeter for a Notre Dame team that is trying to shake off that early season loss to NIU, especially considering that that loss doesn't look as good now that NIU continues to lose and is 4-4, including 2 straight losses. They just lost last weekend to Ball State. So that's not a good loss for Notre Dame at all. But I think Notre Dame now has righted its ship. They are firmly still in a good position to land a playoff spot. And Navy is still looking good as well. I mean, if you have one loss right now and you lost to a really good Notre Dame squad, I don't think there's anything to hang your hat on about that loss. I think Navy will see a fight to see another day, certainly. But shout out to Navy for going unbeaten for as long as it did. And we'll see where they go from here. We'll see where Notre Dame and Navy go from here, because there's still some season to be played. There's still some meaningful games left for both of these schools. So wishing them both luck the rest of the way. Texas A&M, now they're looking like legitimate contenders in the SEC. They lost to Notre Dame early in the season, week 1. And after its 38-23 victory over LSU this past weekend, Mike Elko has done a remarkable job during his first season at College Station. A&M has won 7 straight games, including 2 against ranked SEC opponents. This past weekend against LSU, A&M's ground game was active as hell against the Tigers, as the team racked up 242 yards rushing compared to LSU's 24. After the victory, Elko proclaimed, and I quote, "This is a real program. It's not fake," he said. "It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody. This is a real program, and for all the recruits out there, this is a real place," end quote. And then lastly here, before we get to a break, do want to talk about this epic matchup this upcoming weekend for Week 10 action. We've got Ohio State and Penn State, and this is a huge game between 2 ranked Big Ten powers, Ohio State, Penn State. College Game Day announced this weekend that it will hit the road to Happy Valley to cover this game on Saturday. And I know it feels like these last few weeks, Ohio State hasn't really looked like the Buckeyes teams of the past, where they've dominated every game en route to the championship game. They lost against the Ducks a couple weeks ago, and then they barely squeaked out a win against an unranked Nebraska team. And Penn State, they're red hot right now, but make no mistake about it, if Penn State wants to crack into the upper echelon, it will need to be able to beat Ohio State this weekend. No ifs and buts about it. And if you didn't know, Ohio State has dominated this series. The Buckeyes have beaten the Nittany Lions 11 of the last 12 meetings. Additionally, Penn State is 1-9 versus Ohio State under James Franklin, its head coach, and 3-17 versus top 10 teams. And while Penn State can afford to take a loss to Ohio State and still remain firmly in the conversation for the playoffs, Penn State desperately wants to beat Ohio State to remain in the conversation for the Big Ten championship game. However, they may be without their stud junior quarterback, Drew Allar, who injured his left knee late in the first half of the Wisconsin game from this past weekend. We'll have to see. I believe his status is uncertain at the time that I'm recording this podcast, but he would definitely make a huge difference in the game for Penn State, so we'll have to see and monitor his condition as we move forward this week. Regardless, though, the atmosphere in Happy Valley is going to be electric. I wish I could be out there to take in my first Penn State game against 2 teams that will most likely be in the conversation for the expanded playoffs at the end of the season. So that's probably the biggest matchup of the weekend out of the Big Ten. We've got Ohio State and Penn State. I cannot wait to see how that all unfolds. Right now, though, we'll take a quick timeout. I'll take a short break. On the other side of the break, I'll give you my top 5 locks for Week 10 action. Don't go anywhere. The Cherry Pickin' Podcast will be right back.
Want to know what life is really like after the game is all over? Real athletes are here to share their true stories of adversity and triumph every week on After Orange Slices. Even if you don't like sports, pro athletes, former college stars, celebrities, coaches, public speakers, doctors, and all kinds of experts join the show, and there's a little bit of something for everybody. Join me, Bridget, for a slice of inspiration, plus your everyday sports news sprinkled in. New episodes every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, available anywhere you get your podcasts.
I want some nasty!
Are you a member of San Antonio Spurs Nation? If you are, stand up. If you are, stand up. That's right, because this is a Bucking Spurs podcast. I am Robert Trejo Jr., your host here at ABSP, and here we're talking all things San Antonio Spurs basketball, baby. We'll talk NBA as well. We'll have occasional guest hosts dropping in from time to time. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Podcasts, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcast jam on, we are there. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube for special Spurs content. And you already know what it is. Go Spurs, go.
Basketball is back. And with that comes joy, tension, heartbreak, buzzer beaters, and elation. It's time to be courtside for every one of those moments, no matter where your team is playing. Short Court specializes in making replica and custom basketball courts for your home, office, sports cave to decorate your walls with all those memories. If you have a picture, we can recreate it. Featured in the 2021 UniWatch Holiday Gift Guide, Short Courts are made using real wood. We frame and give them an epoxy finish to protect the new centerpiece of your memorabilia collection. With previous customers including Northern Kentucky University, Southern Utah University, 199 Apparel, The Perimeter Podcast with Adam Morrison, and many more celebrating the careers and retirements of their coaches, it's time you visit shortcourts.com for more info and a gallery of our work, or you can send us an email, info@shortcourts.com. Be sure to find us on social media, just search for Short Courts. It's time to bring the home court home.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now I want to give you my top 5 locks for Week 10 action, and we'll start in the ACC. UNC broke its 4-game losing streak with the win against Virginia this past weekend, and it was a much-needed victory. And they got that victory by blowing out Virginia by a score of 41-14. Carolina's offense exploded in that game with 431 total yards, including 138 yards rushing. The Tar Heels defense also had itself a day with 2 interceptions and also limited UVA's rushing attack to only 18 yards on the day. The defense also had an impressive 10 sacks and 12 tackle for losses. Tar Heels defensive end Kamon Rucker led the team with 3 sacks and 3.5 tackle for losses. I'm expecting a similar effort and result for UNC this weekend when it plays Florida State, who dropped its 4th straight loss in a matchup against Miami by a score of 36-14. Nothing is working for Florida State this season, and it's been quite the embarrassment. The Tar Heels aren't world beaters by any means, but with bowl game eligibility in sight for UNC, a potential victory over Florida State this weekend will get them 1 game closer to that goal. UNC will win big this weekend with an impressive performance by running back Omarion Hampton, who has now eclipsed 1,000 yards rushing for the season. So out of the ACC, I'm taking UNC over Florida State. In the Big 12, I can't get a good read on Houston this season. If we just look at their last 5 games, the Cougars suffered shutouts to Cincy and ISU by a combined score of 54-0, where the Cougars were getting blown out by those teams. Then they got on the road to beat TCU, followed by an ugly loss to an underachieving Kansas team by a score of 42-14. And then this past weekend, they beat Utah. So there's no consistency with Houston at all. Now, Kansas State, on the other hand, has been extremely consistent this season en route to a 7-1 record and are currently 3rd in the Big 12 standings. I'm going to go out on a stretch here and say that Kansas State won't lose another game this season until it meets ISU at the end of the regular season. So with that said, I'm taking Kansas State over Houston. Then out of the Big 10, Illinois suffered a humbling loss to Oregon this past weekend in Eugene by a score of 38-9. But I don't think that there were many people who believed Illinois had a chance to go on the road and upset the number 1 Ducks in their own home. Many of my Illini fans didn't go into this weekend's game with any sort of expectations that their beloved Illinois team would win, but I think everyone is believing that they can get back on track in Week 10 with a home victory over Minnesota. If that's going to happen, its quarterback Lute Altmaier is going to have a better game and limit the turnovers. Against the Ducks, Oregon's defense limited Altmaier to only 17 of 35 passing for 161 yards, no touchdowns, and they forced 2 interceptions from the quarterback. Illinois' defense is also going to have to play one of its best games to limit a red-hot Minnesota passing attack. Last week against Maryland, its quarterback Max Brosmer had one hell of a game. He went 26 for 33 passing for 320 yards and 4 touchdowns in the 48-23 point victory over Maryland. For his 5 years of action, Brosmer is currently completing a career-high 69.5% of his pass attempts. He's currently 10th in all of FBS with that mark and 6th best in the Big Ten. This game has all the makings of a trap matchup for Illinois, but I just feel like Illinois is on a mission this season and won't drop this game in front of its home crowd. So I'm taking Illinois over Minnesota out of the Big Ten. Then out of the SEC, it's really hard to not be impressed with Vanderbilt this season. We all know about how they beat a number 1 Bama team a few weeks ago, but I think you've got to really take a look at this team's 3 losses, including 2 against 7th-ranked Missouri and a number 5 Texas team last week. Vandy kept those teams on the ropes and only lost by 3 points. 3 points in both of those games. This is not an average Vanderbilt team this season, which everyone already knew after the first week, but damn impressive that Vanderbilt isn't getting blown out of games. Last week against the Longhorns, Vanderbilt actually outrushed Texas 114 yards to 106 and also limited the penalties to 4. In comparison to Texas, who was penalized, they're pretty penalty prone, to be honest. They had 10 penalties for 107 yards. A big difference in that game is that Vandy committed 3 turnovers, though. Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia is definitely a superstar and was responsible for 3 of Vandy's touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions, and while it didn't lead to any direct points for Texas on the subsequent series, it did kill any momentum Vanderbilt had in that game and on those drives. It's crazy that I'm saying this, but Vandy should be able to beat Auburn this weekend, a team that has gone 1-4 in their last 5 games, and if Pavia is healthy and is able to limit the mistakes on offense, I think Vandy can beat the Tigers and get to bowl eligibility this weekend, which would be the first time that they've earned bowl eligibility within the previous 6 seasons. So I'm taking Vandy over Auburn out of the SEC. And then finally, since there's no Pac-12 or Pac-2 game this weekend, I'm going to give you guys one more SEC prediction. So you're going to get a second SEC prediction out of your boy. So I'm going to take Georgia over Florida this weekend. And it really shouldn't even be close at all, especially considering Georgia is coming off a bye a week after stunning the number 1 Texas squad by a score of 30-15. I think the Bulldogs come out of the bye feeling rejuvenated and will be looking to get a convincing victory over Florida before it begins a stretch of games against Ole Miss and then Tennessee that will really determine whether or not they make it to the SEC championship game and also the playoffs for that matter. The Bulldogs will use this matchup against Florida as a little bit of a primer before it gets really real on November 9th against Ole Miss. Florida, on the other hand, has one of the most brutal schedules remaining out of any team in college football. They get Georgia this weekend, followed by a matchup against ranked Texas, ranked LSU, ranked Ole Miss, and then they end things with Florida State on November 30th, a game which they should technically win. That should technically be a victory for the Gators. So that means Florida will have 5 victories, but will need to upset one of these next 4 SEC teams if it expects to go bowling this season, which would be a huge win for Billy Napier and the Gators faithful. Now, I don't think it will happen this weekend against Georgia, but there's an outside chance of the Gators maybe being able to upset Texas, LSU, or Ole Miss. I'm not saying that they will, but they have a chance, I believe, to upset one of those teams. And if they're able to do that, I feel like Billy Napier's hot seat has to cool off a bit, don't you think? Don't you think that he's got a chance to maybe keep his job if he can get the Gators bowl eligible? I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but I would think that it would probably cool things off quite a bit for him. So there we have it, my friends. Those are my straight up predictions for the week of Week 10 action, straight up out of the Power 4 conferences, Power 5 conferences. So I'll run that back for you one more time. Out of the ACC, I'm taking UNC over Florida State. Out of the Big 12, I'm taking Kansas State over Houston. Out of the Big 10, I'm taking Illinois over Minnesota. Out of the SEC, I'm taking Vanderbilt over Auburn. And out of the SEC, I'm taking Georgia over Florida. So there we have it, my friends. That was my Week 10 college football podcast. I still can't believe that we're in Week 10 of the regular season. And we've got about a month or so left of college football action before we get into the playoffs and bowl games. So still got a few more weeks to enjoy the regular season, but it's been quite the season thus far. But before we sign off for today, I just want to share a little PSA with you. If you didn't know, and if you're an American, there's a big election coming up in 2 weeks. And for the last several years, I've served as a poll worker for my ward in Philadelphia. I am urging you all, if you are registered, to make a plan to go and vote. You can even vote early in some cities right now, like in Philly. You can go to City Hall and vote early. They're encouraging it this year. And this is a bipartisan PSA. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm just saying if you're registered and you want to vote and are interested in voting, please go find more information about the steps that you can take if you are registered and you're planning to vote. And you can do that at vote.gov and find all the information you need for how you can go vote on Election Day, which is November 5th. So that's my friendly PSA to you all. If you're planning to vote, please thank you, first of all, but please make sure you have the appropriate steps and know your plan of action to go and vote this year. So I say all that to just lastly say thank you for listening to this podcast. Hope you enjoyed it this week. Can't wait to talk to you hopefully next week, but I hope you enjoy Week 10 college football action coming up in a few days here. So thank you for downloading this podcast. Thank you for being a friend, and thank you for listening to the Cherry Pickin' Podcast. Can't wait to talk to you hopefully real soon here. Have a good one, everybody. Take care. Peace. Thank you again for tuning into my Cherry Pickin' Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe to my show and drop me a rating on Apple Podcasts. All of my digital content can be found at the website CherryPickinSports.com. And if you are looking to interact with me via social media, my Twitter handle is @Cherry_Pickin. That's PICKIN. On my Twitter, you'll also find a link to my blog where I post my weekly college football predictions and analysis. I can also be reached via email at CherryPickinSports@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me regarding what you like about this podcast or about what content you'd like to hear more of on future episodes. I sincerely thank you for your support, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care.